Due to the length of my frontline update, I have split my news section off into a separate video. Please go and check that out because it fits hand in glove with this. It gives you the kind of context with which we can approach the frontline update today. Anyway, on to the frontline update for the 18th of January 2023. This is an ATP geopolitics video in case you didn't know. Right, let's get into frontline. Okay, we're going to go to the northeast first, as ever, which is the Kupiansk to Svatove to Kreminna axis. So on my map, that looks like this. We've got Kupiansk down here, Svatove here, and Kreminna down there. Just let's have a look at a couple of general claims first. This is from the ISW. Russian forces continue to routinely transfer reinforcements to the Kreminna-Svatove line. That's according to the Luhansk Oblast head, Serhiy Haidai. If Russians are building up in the area, there's a thought that they are possibly counter or attacking before the Ukrainians get a chance to counterattack around here, sort of taking the bull by the horns. Haidai also claimed that Russians sabotaging reconnaissance groups disguised in Ukrainian uniforms and tried to break through Ukrainian defenses in an unspecified area of Luhansk Oblast. So there's been a bunch of claims of this happening recently, both in Bakhmut and in the Kreminna-Svatove area. Russian military bloggers claim that Russian forces are gradually advancing along the Makivka-Zuravka-Balka river line and conducted an assault near Chervona-Popivka. Geolocated footage published on January 17th shows Russian forces holding positions west of Dubrova. Right, that's quite a big claim that I'm going to talk about in a second. So we have, before we get down to the Kreminna area, let's concentrate a little bit on Kuzmivka and Novoselivska here, because Defmon does a little bit of analysis. So this is this small village that is to the west of Kuzmivka that holds quite a lot of importance for attacking Svatova and also in terms of elevation topography in the area. As Defmon says here, if the AFU can hold on to Novoselivska, they will be in good positions to envelop Kuzmivka and Krivoshivka. As can be seen on picture one, Novoselivska is on high ground, and they'll have a good view of Kuzmivka from there. So, in fact, that is true. As you'd expect, this is higher ground up here, and it would be very useful if they can get sustained control of Novoselivska, keep swapping hands, and so they don't give themselves, or they don't get a chance to form an offensive from there. They're just consistently fighting over Novoselivska. I think the next step will be to take control of the high ground towards Sosnovyi. This village has an overview of Svatova and will be able to direct fire on all of the access roads going onto Svatova. One problem might be the Russian-held fortified position just to the south. So this is obviously very close to Svatova, he's suggesting. But it's a kind of like dominoes approach that if Novoselivska allows Kuzmivka to be encircled and taken, and then, you know, certain these other settlements, Kupiansk was taken, but now is under contested again. But if they can successfully take these, then they can continue along this high ground just to the northwest of Svatova. The problem is they are making really slow progress around here at the moment, and have been for some time. Defmon says this is what it looks like from the high ground west of Svatova, looking down at the town. You can see it's a pretty good position to have, and it will be quite hard to attack up the hills for the Russians. This is the idea that Svatova does sit. You can see all these kind of bluffs here. Does sit on a low point, and if the Ukrainians can advance as far as here, then they've got a real advantage for hitting the town, hitting the city. Okay, back onto where am I going? Back onto Defmon just finally. Controlling Novoselivska, Kuzmivka, and Krivoshivka could also greatly improve the Ukrainian logistics in the area, since they might be able to get a buffer along the P07 road. The AFU more or less need to push the Russians down the hill and grab control of as much of the P07 as they can. That road is indeed important there, as it becomes a P or R66 going south to Kreminna. They also need to expand the Kupiansk bridgehead. At the moment, it's in Russian artillery range. Kupiansk is hit by artillery, and they do need to hit through Vilshana to the northeast and Pershotravnevi, but that line has just not shifted. There was fighting recently in Tavolzhanka and Tavorichna, but that's gone quiet again over the last week. So there are positional battles, and it seems that Ukraine are finding it really hard to break the defensive positions of the Russians, at least without some concerted counter-offensive. Kreminna area. So the Russians seem to be focusing on disrupting the UA Kreminna effort. This is what I was saying earlier, by attacking the flank. Battle Group K2, which we saw steal a Russian radio, I showed you that, with a drone, together with the 54th Brigade, has been kicking Russian butt in this area for months. We might see fighting in this area intensify due to increased threat to the Russians in Kreminna. The Ukrainians have repulsed attacks around Belorivka, Verkhanokamayenska, and Spirina. So that's going further down south. And we're going to talk about Dubrova for a second, but let's have a look at that map. So we have Kreminna here. We've got Russians wanting to attack down south through Dubrova. But it could be that Dubrova is now back in Russian hands. That seems to just flip all the time. There's geolocated footage to suggest that. But coming through the forest, but at the same time, the Russians are heading back north of Kreminna in Chervona-Popivka and Ploshchanka area. So as we come down south on my map here, down south of Svatove, the Russians are hitting heavily along the Makivka-Ploshchanka line, and there are repelled attacks around here. But as ISW say, they are making slow advances in this area, and it looks like the Ukrainians have lost momentum and initiative in the Chervona-Popivka-Ploshchanka area and across the P66 highway here, and that the Russians are pressuring backwards, and that geolocated footage suggests that the Russians now have control over Dubrova again. So if we look at Defmon here, we have this geolocated footage. So it seems that the Russians are still in Dubrova. I consider it a grey zone before, due to lack of activity. Before I change it to Russian control, it's unclear if they have permanent positions there. And yeah, that's that geolocated footage of the Ukrainians attacking some Russian position in and around Dubrova. So it's a bit unclear, especially since you still hear things like this: Kreminna operational silence. So there's OPSEC going on around the area, and as according to Noel reports and his sources on the ground, he says that there's operational silence, but a lot of trophies, which means a lot of captured vehicles or destroyed vehicles. Now, exactly where that is taking place, we were under the opinion that it was happening around the the western outskirts of Kreminna, possibly down here. Um, but if Dubrova is back in Russian hands, then it seems odd that there's all this fighting going on and perhaps good things for Ukraine around here, and yet just behind them they are losing ground, and north of Kreminna they could be losing ground as well. I guess we'll wait and see what happens over the next couple of days. Rebar says virtually nothing about the area apart from Makivka, Balkazaravka, Gully. Their continued offensive going on there, which ISW was referring to, and that's in this area here where I've got that sort of small bridgehead. Okay, let's go on down towards Bakhmut. So as we come further down south, got the Bilorivka up here. There has been some reports that the Russians have made some marginal gains uh, around Bilorivka area, this southern Bilorivka, as well as pressuring Vesele, Rozdolivka. There's fighting towards Krasnopolivka as well, which is a very small settlement just north of the Sil area of Solidar. I have Solidar and Sil fully under Russian control, as according to most sources. Some say there might still be elements of the Ukrainians in the very western edges of Sil. So this is when you hear Ukrainian sources or spokespeople say we are still fighting in Solidar. Technically, that might still be correct, but it will literally just be the very last sort of vestiges of that settlement. So let's go and look at some general claims. A Su-25 was shot down in the area, a Russian Su-25. The Ukrainians have lost some, according to the Russians, a fair number of planes and helicopters themselves. Of course, it's always trying to work out how truthful the Russian sources are being. This is the War Mapper change of territory of the Bakhmut area over the last week. So you can see it's all about the north here. I would say again that that's fairly charitable to the Russians because I think they're further in on the eastern suburbs here. But as you can see, they're moving north ever so slowly, and they might even have control of some of this ground here, just as it comes down to Klishchivka. But certainly up north here, some claim that the Russians control the whole of Pidorodny. You can see this river, the Bakhmutovka River, that goes north. As Defmon says, there's no evidence yet that the Russians have crossed that river. I mean, it's not the biggest of rivers, but it's a little bit of an obstacle. And yeah, there's no evidence that that's happened yet. Rebar say Solidar area, Wagner assault units completely liberated Sil or Sol, cutting off the supply between Bakhmut and Siversk. The remaining Ukrainian formations withdrew from Sil to the reserve positions on high ground, that's to the west. A company of unidentified Ukrainian units was moved from Novoselidivka to the outskirts of Krasnopilia. At the moment, the Russian fighters' offensive continues in the direction of Ukrainian strongholds in Blahodatne, Krasnopilia, Razdolivka, Vesely, as well as Paraskevivka and Krasnohora to the north of Bakhmut. Okay, so that is to say that all of these places here, Pidorodny, Krasnohora, Blahodatne, Paraskevivka, and then as we come up to Krasnopolivka, Rozdolivka, and Vesely, all of these places north of Bakhmut are under a lot of pressure. It's worth also saying that I think the Ukrainians are sending in reinforcements. There's this argument about how much effort they put into defending Bakhmut, whether that's a good use and efficient use of their troops. Yes, they want to bleed the Russians for as much as they can for every meter gained, but they don't want to overdo it. However, I hear rumors of troops being moved from quite far afield to come on other parts of the front line to come and help in the Bakhmut area with leave cancelled and things like that. So watch out for how this develops and how much effort Ukraine put into defending. There you go. So no report says Russian forces are attacking Krasnohora and Blahodatne. Until now, no significant gains have been reported. Russian forces were spotted east of Krasnopolivka in former Ukrainian trenches. They were eliminated, but shows the extent of the contested area. And I've seen that footage as well of those trenches and people being taken out there. Now, in Solidar, now that the Ukrainians have lost Solidar, they are keeping quite a firm eye on it in terms of drone footage, and there were three, and this may be a fourth, there were three ammunition dumps, I guess, that were taken out by the Ukrainians. This is a significant ammunition dump in Solidar that our good friend with the pointy stick talks about in great detail. There's footage of him pointing out all these different bits of ammunition that they have here, and it's quite a significant amount. Sorry, I hate it when it does that because it goes onto the sound again. So yeah, lots of stuff there. And anyway, they blow it all up. But it is the long and short of it. And that is going to be incredibly useful for the Ukrainians to do, because obviously it hamstrings the Russian offensive in the area, because that will be, all the ammunition they're going to be using. So as I said, Defmon says that no signs of crossing that Bakhmutovka River. Just to show you on my map where that river is, we have this river that kind of cuts through Bakhmut, and in fact, this is the argument that they could lose all this territory up to the river, and they could still defend Bakhmut really effectively. Take out that river, that bridge there, and it becomes a lot more difficult for the Russians to advance. So the Bakhmutovka River is a useful natural barrier, and it goes right up here, and the Russians are on the edge of it. Perhaps in Krasnohora area, Paraskevivka, but they haven't crossed it. And as I say, goes on up there, so on and so forth. So they haven't crossed that yet. Okay, let's come further down south into Bakhmut itself. We have claims from the Russians that they have attacked or they have some purchase on, is it Shevchenko Street, just in the northeastern suburbs of Bakhmut. However, no report says that's not true. Yeah, so fighting continues in Zabamutka district. The Russian breakthrough near Shevchenko Street is false. Fighting in Opitny continues. The northern part of Opitny is grey, area controlled by neither parties. Russian recon is very active east of Opitny. So this will be just below the garbage disposal area. So there is going to be fighting all around here. Don't really know any details, any further details of fighting in Maximienko Street, but there is, as according to no reports, a lot of good reconnaissance for the Russians around here. So it's difficult for the Ukrainians to do much around there. If we go back to Rebar, in Bakhmut itself, there's heavy fighting in the urban environment on Labour Reserve Street, Patrice Lumumba Street, and Mali Trotsky Alley. So just to let you know where all those places are. So they're talking about this road in Opitny, that's Mali Trotsky. That's the fighting is still there. So the Russians haven't advanced any further. Patrice Lumumba Street is around here. So they're still fighting along here. It doesn't look like they've got any further around there. And in fact, I don't think the Russians have made many gains. It looks like the front lines have stabilized a little bit around Bakhmut, including around Klishchivka. Interestingly, Rebar also talk about how Ukrainian leadership are increasing the rate of mobilization. Well, I haven't talked about that, but they are saying that they are throwing troops into the Bakhmut area, but they're saying they are throwing in mobilized troops who are being given notice without medical commission and without taking into account the health status of citizens. That could well be propaganda. But they say about Klishchivka, there's fighting for control of Klishchivka. The Ukrainians deployed forces of the 3rd Brigade and unit of the 226th Kraken Special Forces Battalion to the village. So if that's true, it shows that Klishchivka is super important for maintaining control over Bakhmut. Russian advance is complicated by the presence of numerous strongholds in houses and difficult terrain. So this is it. This is good news for the Ukrainians, but it shows that the initial claims that Klishchivka had fallen were a little bit hasty, and they're finding it difficult to fight through Klishchivka and onto these heights behind with the entrenchments there. No reports says of Klishchivka that Russian forces are knocking on the door of the southern part, but haven't taken control. They try to fight themselves away up the west, where fortified Ukrainian units are stationed on higher ground. And he's also got confirmation that Ukrainian reinforcements are present there. So it seems to have stabilized. They will find it tough in Klishchivka, but I'm pretty sure that Russia will send everything against the Ukrainians here. I was talking because the ISW was talking about Wagner culminating here, and you wonder, well, is this really the sign of culmination if they're making these gains? But you've got to understand that also it appears that these gains are coming on the back of VDV and LPR and DPR and all sorts of different forces being thrown here. It's not just Wagner and the Wagnerites. It could well be that Wagner have culminated or would have culminated, but they've been hugely reinforced by regular Russian units as well, by the sounds of it. And so you've got a mix of it. It will be interesting to see how the next week plays out and whether you see the Russians running out of steam and the Ukrainians being able to bolster their defenses. Right, let's move on to further to the south. So as we come down south from Bakhmut, we are going to pass Toretsk, New York. Not a lot of news coming out from that whole area until we get down to Novobakhmutivka, Krasnohorivka here, where there are repelled Russian attacks, and Kamyanka as well. I think the Russians made a little bit of gain around there. In fact, the Novoselivska Druha, I told you the other day about 5 vehicles being taken out there. Well, actually, it might be in Vodyane because now the claim is that it happened near Vodyane, and it wasn't 5. It turns out it was 7 vehicles that were completely destroyed. Infantry fighting vehicles, at least 7 Russian BMP-1. So they're not the greatest of vehicles, but 7 of them taken out is not good news. And that's in Vodyane, which is an area that Russians say that they have taken. I've moved my maps to show slightly north of Opitny here, and some movement for the Russians going towards the west, taking the eastern area of Vodyane. That's according to the Russians. I haven't really had confirmation from Ukrainian sources, but certainly pressure around here, which could then, if they do manage to get Vodyane, gives pressure on Pervomaisky. But there are repelled attacks all around here as per usual. Pervomaisky, Pisky, Novelsky, which is just down here. The ISW says Pushilin claimed on January the 16th that Russian forces are close to being able to announce the capture of Vodyane, and a Russian military blogger claimed on January the 17th that the Russian forces pushed Ukrainian forces out of positions on the eastern outskirts of the settlement, but that can't be verified by ISW, so that's their claim there. Rebar, they do say that Ukrainians took some losses in the area, and artillery and mortar shells were supplied to the AFU in Spartak, Vodyane, and Pervomaisky. However, the soldiers of the AFU complain that the ammunition is unusable. May well be, who knows? So there is fierce fighting going on again in the Avdivka area, where it had gone quiet for some time. Now, there's some various claims going on about Marinka, which is south of Avdivka. Just to give you an idea of where everything is, we've got Bakhmut here, Avdivka there, and then we go down south to Marinka, I think around there. Around Marinka, there are some claims. Null Reports says that some area has been gained by the Russians here. So Russian forces made a little progress near the former military hospital in Marinka, and he gives that area there. I have that already under Russian control. So this is this area here. So I don't really. I'm not going to change my maps on the basis of that. But interesting what the ISW says. Pushilin also claimed on January the 17th that Russian forces have cleared all high-rise buildings in Marinka. How do you clear all high-rise buildings? I guess that's going to be in the central part of Marinka. Depends what you define as high-rise in Marinka, and are close to capturing the settlement. So then suddenly we're getting back to, well, then the whole settlement is now close to being captured by the Russians, just like that. Again, really? Russian military bloggers claim that Russian forces broke through Ukrainian defenses on the western outskirts of the settlement, and the Russian forces need to capture as little as 300 meters of the western outskirts to completely control the settlement. Well, let's have a look at what 300 meters is. That's, yeah. So apparently they just need that left, just this part here, and then Bob's your uncle. So, yeah, I can't see that as being anything remotely like the truth. We've heard before that they're beating them back to the western outskirts, and it turns out they're still fighting in the center. The next day, Russian sources sort of walk back on those claims. I don't know. Rebar says fighting continues in Marinka. Russian servicemen broke through Ukrainian defenses and pushed them to the west. Just to the west is quite generic. Still, calling liberation imminent is premature. So it's walking back some of the other claims. The AFU still hold positions in the west, even in Russian. As Russian forces are clearing the center of the city. Currently, there's no evidence of a Ukrainian retreat. On the contrary, 10 Humvees are planned to go to Marinka to reinforce the 35th Marines Brigade. At the same time, paratroopers of the AFU 79th Brigade are requesting ammunition and drones to be supplied. Pushing them to the west is, of course, the direction that the Russians are moving in. So, of course, they're going to be pushing them to the west. Anyway, repelled fighting around Pobyeda, Novomykhailivka, and even in, I think, the Vuhledar area and some places around here. So Velika Novosilka and towards Prachistivka as well, fighting going on there. What can we say about Crimea and Kherson? Well, as we go towards Kherson, it's worth noting possibly again that Nikopol and Mohanets around just to the north of the lakes near Zaporizhia has been hit again. So there's Nikopol there. We see it just gets hit by shelling so often. I mean, Mohanets, Chervona Bihorovivka. Yeah, these places get hit all the time by the Russian artillery over the other side of the lake, and it just it must be horrible living there, just having every night Nikopol and Mohanets just getting consistently hit. Kherson was hit with incendiary ammunition again. Just imagine just seeing that coming down. I think that, I mean, it looks so pretty and then when it gets down, it's just horrific, and that is, of course, against Geneva Convention and whatnot, and gets a mention in the ISW second observed instance of Russian forces using incendiary munitions against Kherson City in the past 10 days. The 1980 Protocol 3 on incendiary weapons of the Convention of Certain Conventional Weapons restricts the use of incendiary weapons against or near civilians. Russian forces continue to strike areas on the west bank of Kherson, including Kherson City, Berislav, and other environs. And their counter battery fire is working around there. So here we see somewhere near Holopristan that is hit and burns for quite a long time. So there are just artillery duels that are going to be taking place all alongside there. I haven't heard much anything about sort of Crimea. I did talk about the drones being sent over. Reporting from Ukraine did a video that might be worth your while watching that talks about swarms being sent over to try and find weaknesses in air defenses to then exploit those weaknesses at a later point. But anyway, there you go. That's a frontline update for the 18th of January. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Big thanks to Tom Smith, who is a great supporter of the channel and often chips in with thanks. I really appreciate that. That's YouTube thanks. Thank you so much for your support. Anyway, Toodle Pips, and I'll catch you later.